Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, we're in it. I have finished The Handmaid's Tale. I'm on book 2, halfway through. So I have a better idea, even more so now, of the world that has been created by this author. And one thing to note as we go into it, through literature, a lot of ideas are passed through. Think of Homer's Iliad, Lord of the Rings, cultural phenomenons, Anna Karenina of Leo Tolstoy, fiction, Harry Potter even. I mean, literally Game of Thrones was a book, then became a series, and look how much of a cultural phenomenon it became. Same with Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon. So let us not pretend that literature has zero impact on what people think about, how they think about it, and whatnot. So, more and more, as I mentioned in previous videos, when you are pro-life, and you're not very for abortion, and you stick up for men, and you have positive things to say about marriage and whatnot, you get a lot of references from this book, from The Handmaid's Tale. So, I read it, and I can see where they're getting their ideas from, and I can see the cleverness of this feminist writer, who definitely has anti-Islamic undertones, for sure anti-Christian tones, and has a sort of Jewish spin. When I first saw her, I thought she was Jewish, but she has this sort of Nazi-esque feel to the book, where it's like, you know how the Jays had to hide and how they were persecuted and the authoritarianism of the Third Reich and whatnot. She has that in here. So if you look her up, you see she's a very pro-J. She's almost an activist for them in a way, I think. So it's interesting that a very pro-Judaic person is writing a book that really goes after Christians heavily. I mean, there's something very fascinating about that. So let's begin. We're on page 32, and I've highlighted some things here that I wanted to share with you so you can kind of see my point, and let's dissect this text. Beside the main gateway, there are 6 more... Oh yes, I see. Okay, so remember, there's 6 more bodies hanging right here, right? But they go further down. Each has a placard hung around his neck to show why he has been executed. A drawing of a human fetus. They were doctors then in the time before, when such things were legal. Angel makers, they used to call them. Or was that something else? They've been turned up now by the searchers through hospital records. Okay, so here we see some really interesting notes here I want to share with you. So she says human fetus. Doesn't say human child. So an abortionist, a doctor who did that as a profession, was hung up by the Christians. Okay. Now the weird part is she's very pro-Quaker. Quakers were very peaceful people. Very peaceful. From what history tells us. But in Gilead, this imaginary dystopian society, they're anti-Catholic. And there's the Baptists and the Quakers are fighting each other. So sectarian Christian violence is what's part of this empire, okay? And we know that a lot of Christians, you have a lot of Muslims who they'll say abortion's okay because the soul doesn't come at 40 days. But you are stopping a life from forming, okay? And if you're going to give me the 40-day argument, you can't give me the, 25th week argument, alright? So, be careful. And we know the Jays, some of them have been pro-abortion. If you recall Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's famous line where she says, our brothers and sisters of the Jewish community are wanting their abortion rights. You can look up that clip. Now, I don't think Orthodox Jews, the Hasidic Jews, support that. But I'm not a Jewish scholar, so you gotta go look that up. But there's something to be said about abortionists, right? Now, in the book, second book, they go through records of people and find out who you were, what you did. And in the second book, if a woman had an abortion, she was execution by fire squad. So, if you recall, feminists, that's their number one issue. They want the right to eliminate life in their womb, while at the same time claiming they want IVF and they want fertility treatments. You have this really strange part of women who want to eliminate their seed and the others who want their seed. It's really quite confusing. And then the population reduction, what's happening. It's a big mess right now, culturally. But I hate it when they don't say, a human life, a human, a baby. They say fetus. It has this very nasty, almost viper-esque feel to it. So she wants us to feel bad that an abortionist was hung up. But if you actually look at the recordings, which I have done, and actual footage of what it looks like when what they do to the baby, the remains, the human remains, you would see it's a very bloody business. And it's not so glorious. And then I recall there was a female activist who got pregnant on purpose just to get an abortion to film it to make content. And she was saying how wonderful it is, how spiritual it was, very demonic feeling. So Christians have always done a great job at trying to have pregnancy resource centers, trying to help women feel like there's hope, that they shouldn't abort their child just because they're not rich. But liberal women are very disgusted. In fact, if you ask a liberal woman, is it better for a child to be born as a slave or be aborted as a fetus, they would say aborted. So they'd rather your child not exist than to be a slave. So they're very death culty. And so it's not a surprise that this author puts this in here, in both books, by the way, when in a time where it's so culturally relevant. Okay. Angel makers. Now remember, Christians would be like, oh, a child was murdered, so they're little angels in heaven now. That's how they would talk about the victims of abortion. But here we see the liberal feminist is like, no, that's not even a human, so you can't say they got turned into angels because they're just a clump of cells. So if a woman is pregnant and a man murders her and the baby dies, he can get charged for the life of the baby that was taken. Feminists love that. But if she aborts the baby, it's no longer a human. So for feminists, it's only a human if you want it. That's how they measure life. It's not that it's a human because it's our species. There's a soul there, heartbeat. No. It's only human if you want it. They even use terms like parasite. There was a viral post where a woman wrote on her pregnant belly, not human. That's not human until it leaves the body. And then there's been other research that has shown those really in-depth ultrasounds that are 3D, that when a father was talking close to the baby's womb, the baby smiled. Like, they have the technology now to see facial reactions of the babies while they're in their mother's womb. But feminists will still call that not a human and a clump of cells because there's a skin as a barrier. It's really quite inhumane. So remember, the author's creating a fictional world, but this is also a political, anti-marriage, anti-religious book. Be mindful of that. Now, the searching through hospital records. This has been a fear of many people, that with everything going digital, your medical records being online, that hackers data miners and whatnot are going to be able to access this information. You won't be able to have real privacy. And a lot of the liberals, they wanted a vaccine pass. They wanted you to have an ID passport, like a vaccine card. You had to register and show and proof of vaccination for COVID. So I find it very strange that this author is trying to put in how scary it would be to have a government see your hospital records, yet they were the first to demand such things. They didn't want you to fly. Pilots lost their job. First responders lost their jobs. Some sued, got their jobs back. If you look up how many police departments sued and then got hired back their employees, you'd be quite surprised. But so she here is trying to use that fear. It's a legitimate fear, but the digitization and record keeping of procedures, medications, medical activities being used by a nefarious government retroactively, right? So here she's already put two things in the reader's head: doctors, abortionists and such, and women being punished for having abortions and conducting abortions, and then them being able to find out through the medical records. Because in this book is technically book 1, doctors are found out by their history, their record keeping, what they did as a job. Okay, you can't escape. And then the execution by firing squad is introduced in the second book. So she's framing Christians as very evil people. Very evil people, which I don't agree with, but the more she makes it seem scary, the more I realize her world is actually the hell. Let's begin. Okay, right here. Or more likely, since most hospitals destroyed such records once it became clear what was going to happen. So here she's putting that hospitals became activists. They started destroying records once they realized that the government was investigating who had conduct abortions. Okay. And who had gotten them. Now, I had really considered, I thought a lot about it. If you have 3 abortions, I think that you should be sterilized by the state because you have proven to be unfit. Because in a time where there's the most contraception and it's free and you can get free condoms in so many community clinics, there's so much, there's never been more ways not to get pregnant, but you're so incompetent and so unable to close your legs for every random man who appears, that if you 3 times a child has had their life ended because you just can't say no and you just refuse to have him pull out and such, well, now the state has to do the right thing and sterilize you. Because you are unfit, you're mentally incapacitated and morally bankrupt. And you are a criminal because you committed 3 murders. Right? That's how I think about it, and I really feel that way. So, here she's saying like the hospitals, they're trying to support the hiding of truth. Because if you are proud of getting an abortion, you should eye for an eye. You took a child's life, you're proud of it, you bragged about it. Remember, I've shown you people who've had abortion cakes. I posted that on my community tab and on my blog. Just type in keyword abortion on the blog, you'll see it. Also the hashtag where they say deletus the fetus. They make tons of jokes about how happy they are and how joyous and wonderful it is to rip apart another baby, your own bloodline, from your womb because you picked an inferior male to copulate with. And not only did you pick an inferior male who doesn't want to be with you, but you let him finish inside you. So you're incompetent in more than one way, but it's the child's fault, they feel. Right? Very bizarre. And then it says here, by informants, ex-nurses perhaps, or a pair of them, since evidence from a single woman is no longer admissible. So here you can see when Islam says you need a testimony of more than one woman, this is where I was talking about the anti-Islamic angle. Alright? She's trying to be like, oh, believe all women, you gotta just have, you know, one woman is no longer enough. So she's making that sort of point for us, but it's obviously she's using it in an anti-religious way. Now the informants, ex-nurses. So informants are a big thing in Gilead. In her dystopian society in this book, there are tons of informants who inform on each other. There's also a Gestapo, a secret police. They're called the Eyes. And it's an eyeball with wings. Not that clever. I mean, secret police were used in Russia, Mussolini's, Italy, because she's making a book about fascism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism. So having secret police is not that out of the blue. But also America has that as well. You just don't get disappeared, and China has it well, and it's a communist government. So every government, I mean, Israel, she loves the Jays, but they have Mossad, you know. To think that, okay, every government has a way of disappearing people and has their own version of the CIA and of the FBI, you name it. If you are, trading secrets is even in fiction. Who was the spider Varys in Game of Thrones? Clubfoot in House of the Dragon. You're always going to have a master of whisperers, someone who conducts the dirty work. So, it wasn't that unique, to be quite honest with you. Kind of expected if you're writing a totalitarian novel. Or another doctor hoping to save his own skin. Or someone already accused, lashing out at an enemy, or at a random, in some desperate bid for safety. Though informants are not always pardoned. So yes, so the snitching, reporting each other in order to escape. Marxism also has that angle, where the Marxism, when it's really fused in this totalitarian hellscape, when it's an inverted social order, where reporting on your neighbors as not being committed enough. The three-body problem, if you recall, when it showed in the beginning a person being executed, it's on Netflix. Some people turning in their own fathers, people turning in people. It gets messy when, wasn't it Mao Zedong who would punish 3 generations? So you had to be really careful. People turning against each other for the regime is something that happens in history. It's quite sad. But she's just copying the playbook of what we've seen in history. Not really that unique. These men, we've been told, are like war criminals. It's no excuse that what they did was legal at the time. Their crimes are retroactive. They have committed atrocities and must be made into examples for the rest. Though this is hardly needed, no woman in her right mind these days would seek to prevent a birth, should she be so lucky as to conceive. So remember, she's trying to be like, oh, it was legal, but they're doing retroactive punishments. So that is an angle that you're like, hey, that's not exactly fair if you go back in time and punish people for activities for certain things. But it depends on what we're talking about. Like someone who did a carjacking, because there's a time stipulation on some things in law. If it's been past 10 years, I forgot the term for it, it's on the tip of my tongue. But some of them have like, hey, you're out of that area to kind of press a case. Yet, you'll get liberals who have a woman who will come out 20 years later and say, so-and-so touched my boob. And that guy suddenly loses everything based on a 20-year-old accusation with no evidence and no witnesses. So it's funny that she doesn't want people punished retroactively for things that are documented in medical records, but feminists want men punished for things that have zero evidence and are above the time period. You're just like, there's no way to even prove that. So I found it funny, their hypocrisy. What we aren't supposed to feel towards these bodies is hatred and scorn. This isn't what I feel. These bodies hanging on the wall are time travelers, anachronisms. They've come here from the past. What I feel towards them is blankless. What I feel is that I must not feel. What I feel is partly relief, because none of these men is Luke. Luke wasn't a doctor, isn't. So here you see, she's talking about Luke again. Luke plays a key role. We never find out what happened to him. So, that's a sad thing. Now, Moria is like a feminist weirdo in this book who ends up going to work in the brothel and getting sterilized, and she's very vulgar. So, just be familiar with her character. Now, there's a dialogue here between the main character, and I think it'll show you more about how the author can show personality quite well. On the floor of the room there were books, open face down. This way and that way, extravagantly. "Now," said Moira, "you don't need to paint your face, it's only me. What's your paper on?" "I just did one on date R-wording," I have to say that. "Date R-wording," I said. "You're so trendy. It sounds like some kind of dessert. Date rapé." "Ha ha," said Moria. "Get your coat." She got it herself and tossed it at me. "I'm borrowing $5 off you, okay? Or in a park somewhere with my mother." How old was I? Okay, so she goes on to the next dialogue. It's important to see how Moria is this kind of on-the-nose, San Franciscanite, modern, lippy chick. Okay? Because the main character sees her as like brave, iconic, and whatnot. A woman who knows what she wants and who is defiant to the very end, sorta. She chooses to get railed by commanders instead of going by firing squad, so I don't really consider her that brave. Now, it does say here on page 39 that writing is forbidden. So, women are not allowed to write. They're also not allowed to read. So she puts in that fear of... Because liberals, I will give them this. They do like the exchange of knowledge. And some things have to be discussed, even if they should only be discussed by certain people. So, intellectuals in certain totalitarian regimes were sent bureaucrats, not exactly intellectuals, but college professors and such, they were taken and executed. Especially under the communist regimes. Because they were the ones who were going to put the ideas in the students' heads that could cause an uprising, a rebellion. So, I get where she's coming from, where it's like the power of the pen to tell stories. And that women don't have a right to be educated in any sense in Gilead. And in the second book, you see that their education ends in like a junior high level. They're not allowed to go into like a high school or a college. So she really gets into the anti-female education angle, which is something that like you get images of Malala and the Taliban, right? Now here in part 8, there's another interesting angle. The good weather holds. It's almost like June, when we would get out our sundresses and our sandals and go for an ice cream cone. There are 3 new bodies on the wall. One is a priest still wearing the black cassock that's been put on him for the trial, even though they gave up wearing those years ago. When the sect wars first began, Cossacks made them too conspicuous. The 2 others have purple placards hung around their necks. Gender treachery. Their bodies still wear the guardian uniforms, caught together. They must have been, but where? A barracks, a shower? It's hard to say. The snowman with the red smile is gone. We should go back, I say to Offglen. I'm always the one to say this. Sometimes I feel that if I didn't say it, she would stay here forever, but is she mourning or gloating? I still can't tell. Without a word, she swivels, as if she's voice-activated, as if she's on little oiled wheels, as if she's on top of a music box. I resent this grace of hers. I resent her meek head, bowed as if into a heavy wind, but there is no wind. So later, Offglen is part of the Underground Female Road, which was a stupid name because it's copying the Underground Railroad of Harriet Tubman, where slaves were smuggled. I just think it's just an ugly name, and I don't think you should, I just feel like taking the Underground Railroad and switching it to such a clunky name is not right. And these women are not exactly slaves. You know, they chose where they wanted to go. It's just different. I just thought it was not a good plot, really, or incident in here. But Offglen is part of the Mayday. Mayday is payday, they call it. It's a secret operation that takes women and children out of Gilead. And so she's a secret spy who, spoiler alert, but if you're watching this, you should be expecting spoilers. She unalives herself by having the noose. When she finds out that her treachery has been found out. And then when she's found out, the main character is like, uh-oh, I don't want to be found out either. But she's been sleeping with Nick, who's a guardian, and he's part of the Underground Railroad and Mayday and all that. Underground Female Road. And he smuggles her, but we never learn if she survives and gets out or anything from the book. Has a really Tony Soprano ending, which I don't like, those kinds of endings that leave you on a cliffhanger. But she did it because like the Anne Frankish type of ending, so, you know, it's not really clever. It's kind of cliche. But you can see how much she hates Offglen, but then later likes her and admires her. But one thing I will say is also this, that she hates the grace and hates the bowed head. Because Christian women are told to be meek. They're told to be helpmeets. She's attacking here the Christian ethos of female manners. She doesn't like it. It's the ballerina-esque, classy, even though you're sad and may not be happy, you still can be smooth, calm, and collected. Remember, she likes Moria, who's a bit more... She's a lesbian feminist who's grungy and grimy, snarky, and mannish. So, remember, we're seeing the character here is... she admires Moria, who is off-putting, and dislikes the feminine nature. Very important. You hear a lot of people who dislike Christians are Christian feminists, oxymoron, don't like it when they read the Bible verses that tell women to be quiet in church and stuff like that. Because the women of today, as I've learned, and really gotten to see with a blank eye, we're taught to be very intrusive, very loud, combative, resentful, scornful, disharmonious, making a fuss, entitled, opinionated, scratchy. You know, it's something that is a problem. Coming towards us, there's a small procession, a funeral. 3 women, each with black transparent veil thrown over her headdress. An Econ wife and 2 others, the mourners, also Econ wives, her friends perhaps. Their striped dresses are worn looking, as are their faces. So the striped dresses is obviously what the Jays wore in their camps. This is what I'm talking about. She tries to really put in a lot of imagery of the Jays, and here you can see she's framing the Christians as oppressing these type of JS characters. So I find it very on the nose. I'm surprised more Christians aren't offended by this book, but they're probably doing other things. So maybe they'll become aware of this book more once I dig into it, inshallah. Someday, when times improve, says Aunt Lydia, no one will have to be an econ wife. The first one is the bereaved, the mother's. She carries a small black jar. From the size of the jar, you can tell how old it was when it foundered. Inside her flowed to its depth 2 or 3 months, too young to tell whether or not it was an unbaby. The older ones and those that die at birth have boxes. So, because there's, remember, in Gilead, really all around, there's a lot of pollution going on. A lot of pollution. It's been causing deformities and miscarriages. So, the people of Gilead have tried to maximize fertility, although it doesn't work. Their handmaid program makes no sense at all. That a handmaiden is passed from household to household until she gives birth. It doesn't make sense. They're only allowed one wife, but they're allowed to have a handmaiden like one time to have an extra baby. It doesn't make any sense at all. If you were going to maximize fertility, you would allow no handmaidens and multiple wives. The Islamic polygamy model. You know, but she's not very good at creating it. That's why I think it's a sort of fetish. This is like, hold me down and make me be railed by the commander while his wife is in the room. Because the wife is in the room during the ceremonies. You know, feminist comedians and writers, they like to put in their fetishes, in their rhetoric, in their stuff. When I read this is like her own secret fetish coming into play. Because logically, you wouldn't only assign one wife. It just doesn't make sense. You would just allow concubinism and polygamy. If you were trying to maximize fertility. And the handmaid babies are shamed. In the second book, you see that. So that wouldn't make sense. They call the handmaidens sluts. I thought they were heroes because they're helping to repopulate the earth. So why would children of the handmaidens who are only given to the commanders be seen as the babies of sluts? If the handmaidens are so noble and needed for barren women, doesn't make any sense. Makes no sense at all. And a lot of feminists are the ones who support surrogacy today. And the handmaidens are like a strange inversion of surrogacy. It just doesn't make any sense. You know. And then she points out how the econ wives scowl and spit on the sidewalk and don't like the handmaidens. It doesn't really make sense. You know, so you can see the rivalry between the women. From the wives to the handmaids. From the little girls who wear white. The daughters of the commanders of the upper echelons of society. They also don't get close with the handmaidens and they kind of like stare at them. They don't really associate with them. And the handmaidens are not really valued. So you can see there's a lot of angles of women not liking each other. Which is actually very realistic. You can have the kumbaya, we're all a giant sisterhood. But class structures and class alliances can kind of show you how that's just not the case. You know. So, the econ wives don't like the handmaidens. And they say phrases like, under his eye. And for us Muslims, we say like, you know, Allah is all-knowing, all-seeing. Christians believe that their God is all-seeing as well. Now, the under his eye also can be the secular version of Big Daddy government, which is symbolized by the eye of surveillance. So think of, what is that called in China? Skynet. The Chinese communist atheists, the secularists in a real way as well, they use surveillance, Big Daddy government. And the eye has always had a very unique history in art. The evil eye, the eye of knowledge, seeing things, but symbolically the eye perceives. Think of in Lord of the Rings, the eye, Saruman. It's always looking, right? Has this vision. So if you're trying to hide, well, it's going to be quite difficult. But the handmaidens say, like, under his eye, so does everyone else, like the aunts. But when we say Inshallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, we have phrases we say more than the Christians. Christians in the past, I think, used to say more. We say dhikr, remembrances. Buddhists have mantras. Christians don't do that as much today. They just say, oh, in Jesus' name, or stuff like that. Jesus be praised. Very rarely, though. Christians are losing their traditions, at least in America. So she makes sure to insert these phrases that are performative and resented. You see? It's not an accident that she does that. That she makes the people in the society say their own remembrances to show she's trying to show you cult-like behavior, speech being controlled, stuff like that. How believers identify each other and how people are commanded to speak. To me, when I see over terrible slang being used, speech, people's English levels going down, I see that as more scary than someone saying under his eye. The fact that people are losing the ability to spell, using numbers instead of writing the word to, that's more pitiful than someone saying under his eye. But also the phrase is meant to scare, Goes further down. So Nick looks up and begins to whistle. Then he says, "Nice walk?" I nod, but do not answer with my voice. He isn't supposed to speak to me. Of course some of them will try, said Aunt Lydia. All flesh is weak. All flesh is grass. I corrected her in my head. They can't help it, she said. God made them that way, but he did not make you that way. He made you different. It's up to you to set the boundaries. Later you will be thanked. So here we get to see how her and Nick start getting at each other. It's really creepy, the character Nick overall. He rescues her, but he also helps her to sneak out and have secret meetings with the commander. And he gets her pregnant. The wife wants Nick to get her pregnant so she can get a baby, because she suspects the commander is infertile. So just analyzing the character Nick is pretty strange. But maybe you can think he falls in love with her in the end, or he only cares about her because she gets pregnant with his child. If she wouldn't have gotten pregnant with his kid, would he have cared? I don't know. But here you just see a glimpse of how their relationship starts to fold out. But she proves Aunt Lydia's point. We as Muslims are told to lower our gaze, to try to avoid free mixing, and that you should be careful. And that men and women are different, and men have a higher libido, and they're constantly glazing for a potential opportunity with women. But, they can't help it. I would agree with Aunt Lydia. See, in this book I liked Aunt Lydia. The second book we actually learn more about her, and I don't really like her anymore because of who she was, I see in the second book. But at least in here, when we first get to learn with her, I thought she was pretty cool. But the author kind of ruined that. because she turned out to be not really committed to the cause. Now, she goes on to say how her commander's wife is. She's called Serena Joy. Her real name's Pam. And she usually gives speeches about the sanctity of the home and how women should stay home. There it is. So the trad wife phenomenon has been going more and more on social media, where women are saying, you know what? Maybe there's more to life than networking on LinkedIn and being a waitress, and maybe there's more to life than being a CVS cashier. Maybe I do want to have more control of my peace and actually be with my children as they grow. Because there are some moms who they're glad their kids are gone 5 days a week from 8 to past 3 even. They're happy about that because they can drink, smoke weed, do whatever the hell they want. They don't give a damn. And then they got after school programs. Some moms, they like, here, go with a nanny, goodbye. They don't care. But there are women who say, no, I want to stay home and I don't need to be arguing with people in customer service jobs. I don't want to have to smile at my boss. I like to just be who I really am and exist on earth in my natural state, even though every pathway has risks. You can lose your job can close, you can get fired, you can get sexually harassed. You know, there's tons of risks that come with jobs. And you stay at home, you lose things too. So, no matter what, Earth is going to have suffering. So you pick your path. But I have advocated that my mental health became much better once I got out of customer service. My first job I got when I was 12. I used to help my grandpa go carpet cleaning even before that. I've always worked. I've been a stay-at-home mom for almost 4 years now. And I can say I'm much happier and I feel more sane because I no longer have to put on the mask of customer service. I'm no longer at the beck and call of customers, and I no longer have to play work politics. I can be myself and exist, enjoy nature, enjoy my children, and cook whatever I want. Inshallah. It's a different life, a better life. But see, she's framing this as bad. She wants, because remember, she props up the women in the text who have jobs, you know, they abort their children, they participate in hookup culture, they like to drink, they like to smoke, they like to get passed around. This is why you can tell when you analyze the text, it's a very feminist book. She frames everything traditional, everything spiritual as evil, wicked, and bad. Okay? Around that time, someone tried to pew 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 her and missed. Her secretary, who was standing right behind her, was killed instead. Someone else planted a whoosh in her car, but it went off too early. So she's talking about here how religious women were attacked. Spiritual women who said women's place was in the home, there was attempts made on their life. Something to think about. So, remember, she's finally shown how the religious people were attacked. Traditionalists were attacked. Recall that she's been making it seem like all the religious people were oppressors. So, the Civil War angles come into fruition here, where competing ideas for how a society should be led are culture clashing in a real sense. Though some people said she put the pew pew in her own car for sympathy. That's how hot things were getting. So what's clever here is you don't know what's real and what's a false flag. We have a term for this. False flags. Both sides can engage in false flags. And I think it was called the Reichstag that Mean Mr. Mustache did. It was an inside job. So she's getting at how both sides will do false flags and inside jobs in order to further the political movement. which is a real phenomenon, you know. She doesn't make speeches anymore. She has become speechless. She stays in her home, but it doesn't seem to agree with her. How furious she must be now that she's been taken at her word. So you see what she did there? So she's like, oh, don't you regret not being out there to be giving speeches, being a boss babe, you know, being a Candace Owens, being Allison Buckley, or Allie Buckley is her name. Just look at it. Okay, what she's doing here is clever because a lot of the popular Christian women who are activists, they put, like Lauren Chen, they put their kids with nannies while they go out and preach about traditional values. And they're career women, and they are heavily beautified and free mixed with men. Candace Owens sitting in a room with Kanye West, you know, but her husband, you know, very good friends with Andrew Tate, a pimp. Some shadiness going on there, even though she does some good work. But she's showing here, practice what you preach. Look what you've been promoting. Now when it's been put upon you, now you see a taste of your own medicine. You get to see the fruit of your labors. Now you don't like it. You should have sided with the other side. That's what she's doing here. So she's kind of saying how women no longer have voices anymore. And she's not a busybody. She's not networking in downtown Manhattan. She's not going through the lecture circuit. So she's kind of highlighting the careful what you preach because you just might get it. Be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. And how some women can claim they want something, but once it's applied to them, they don't like it. So I think certain women should be allowed that right. And idiots like, say, Cardi B, Sexy Red, they shouldn't be given a platform. The Hawktois girl who literally talked about spitting on male orifices, let's just say that, or genitalia, organs, she gets a podcast. No, that shouldn't be allowed to happen. The free market, no, there should be some control to wipe out some degeneracy. Okay, Call Me Daddy podcast is another one, super vulgar. I think that's what it's called. But remember, not every woman should have a voice. Okay? So she's been taken at her word. So it's like, okay, you want that? We'll give it to you. And now she's saying it doesn't take with her. You gotta have hobbies, but remember, the wives have gardens. And that's a wonderful thing. And she knits and crochets. Very traditional hobbies. But the author has framed that as not enough. For some women, maybe that isn't enough. Then I would say, write poetry, but the women are denied that ability. So, in order to prevent cabin fever, I've argued you do need to have a way of getting that excess energy out. But here she's pointed out how that's not possible for everybody. And in the new society, women aren't allowed that. It's not the husbands you have to watch out for, said Aunt Lydia. It's the wives. You should always try to imagine what they must be feeling. Of course they will resent you. It's only natural. Try to feel for them. Aunt Lydia thought she was very good at feeling for other people. Try to pity them. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. So you see how she inserts the Jesus line? When Jesus is on the cross? Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. But how can Jesus pray to himself if he's God? Anyways, you can see here that one of the aunts is telling them you gotta watch out for the wives. So the wives can try to actually harm the handmaidens because they're jealousy of their husband getting another woman pregnant. Because the wife has control over the home, but the husband gets to decide to put in a request for a handmaid. So, the envy here. The envy. But why she can't just be another wife and stay and live there is something I don't understand. So, you can see the women not getting along. You must realize that they are defeated women. They have been unable. Her voice broke off, and there was a pause, during which I could hear a sigh. A collective sigh from those around me. It was a bad idea to rustle or fidget during these pauses. Aunt Lydia might look abstracted, but she was aware of every twitch, so there was only the sigh. "The future is in your hands," she resumed. She held her own hands out to us, the ancient gesture that was both an offering and an invitation to come forward into an embrace, an acceptance. "In your hands," she said, looking down at her own as if they had given her the idea, but there was nothing in them. They were empty. It was our hands that were supposed to be full of the future, which could be held but not seen. So here, the wives are defeated, as in they no longer have control of who their husband sleeps with. They no longer have control of if their husband desires to have another woman. You see? And some of them just can't handle polygamy. It's not real polygamy, though. They just can't handle the idea of it. And so they're the queens of their castles, but they can't control all aspects. You see a very psychological element in this book about possessiveness. Okay, we'll pause here. But just remember, there's an agenda to the text. It's creative. I'll give it that. But it's not as creative. I could write better if I wanted to. I know that sounds so arrogant, but you could make a fertility cult dystopian society way more nightmarish. But I don't think that was exactly her goal. I think her goal was to just really attack Christians and attack right-wing conservatives. That's what I think. So, be cautious. Remember the characters. And remember how she treats the other women and how she is always trying to find fault and judgy. She's very judgy. The way she talks about Serena Joy, the way she's almost happy that she's frail and sick, and yet not looking at her own plot, really rubs me sometimes the wrong way. She also mentions how, like, when she walks up, Serena doesn't acknowledge her presence in any way, even though she knows she's there. And in the second book, we learn that the wives are taught not to get attached to the handmaidens because they'll be leaving soon. And some of them are actual assassins. They try to execute the commander, and they try to hold people hostage, so you have to be very careful. So there's a very low trust society in Gilead. The women are all enemies of each other. And in the second book, you can kind of see why the wives wouldn't be trusting of the handmaids, and why the handmaids wouldn't be as trusting as the wives, because the wives can punish and send her off to the colonies. So, and the handmaids report on each other. They walk in pairs. If one starts slipping, they report each other. And also in the second book, the aunts will do that as well. So there's a lot of checks and balances. And that's important. You see this among the women, but the men, it's not really highlighted. So I think that's why it's even more feministic, because it highlights how this women will say, why don't we all just unite in womanhood? But you realize quickly, women aren't like men in their fraternity. So they're putting the patriarchy as in men are all united, whereas the women are all against each other. You see? But women can never really be united. Because plenty of, like I've said before, you'll see tons of gold diggers who will say they don't mind sleeping with a married man. They don't care at all, as long as they get the bag. That's our problem, they say. And feminists love supporting sex workers, which literally helps a husband to cheat on his wife. So, if you tell those women to cover up, not to loiter for prostitution, feminists will say that's her right to dress that way and sell her body, which hurts another woman. So, feminists are not really into the sisterhood because they enable women to hurt other women And then they get mad at the men for participating in the things that the feminists have permitted for women. It's quite a mess. Quite a mess. So keep all this in mind. Current events and pop culture and cultural classes and clashes, the class system, okay, and the pro-J, anti-Muslim, anti-Christian angle here. Alright? It's very on the nose, very apparent once you start reading it. I hope you learned something. We'll dig in more, okay? But I think you will see how it's important to kind of delve into these texts, because you can take the allure away. Truly. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to read more about what I write, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/melonarchive. Hope to see you there.